All right, so getting into the endocrine system, just kind of on how to study it in a way. It's a lot of information. It was broken up into like 2 different lectures, so you're gonna have to kind of just get through it, take away what you can. The majority of the exam will probably be questions pertaining to what hormones are being released by what endocrine glands, or like what's secreted by like the hypothalamus, or so like releasing hormones by the hypothalamus. So this whole little section right here, where you can see like hormones synthesized by the hypothalamus. A lot of it is going to be releasing hormones that then affect the anterior pituitary. Right, so this is what this is saying. These are synthesized and then stored in the hypothalamus, but I guess we'll get into that in a bit. Just want to do some overview first of like the first couple of slides. So just for future reference, we're gonna, if you want to study ahead on your own, antidiuretic hormone, ADH, it's going to be important. Growth factor, IGF, and then I believe at the end, no wait, that's immunity. That's coming up later on in your exams. So let's just get started with some of the things. This is kind of just brief overview. Like, they are similar than the nervous system and the endocrine system, but at the same time not. Hormones they only travel through blood, and they're going to have target cells, organs, etc. So just review some of this information. Again, read as much as you think you might need for you to really understand the concept, but not too much on that. This kind of does like the overview of the endocrine system section right here. Kind of tells you everything that the endocrine system is really about. You should understand some of the general functions. I think they will ask you some of these, particularly like the digestive processes. These would be, sorry for the notes on the side, but these would be like most of your metabolic processes. So that includes anabolism and catabolism. What else? And then also movement through the digestive tract. You have like gastrin, pepsin, like those are all hormones. So these are major organs. Again, review this. I don't want to spend too much time because this is really just get some knowledge on this, as much as you would feel comfortable with. And in the later review of the things we do, when it gets a little bit further into the understanding of the hormones and how they work, if you feel like you didn't understand certain points, that's when you go back and you strengthen that foundational understanding of the endocrine system. But then, to move forward, because we have this, the heart, and then blood vessels. So pineal gland, major endocrine gland, right? Cells of the pineal gland, pinealocytes, they secrete melatonin. This regulates your sleep-wake cycle. Sometimes you can take pills, like over-the-counter pills, to help you sleep. And it affects the synthesis of hypothalamic hormone, or otherwise more commonly known as gonadotropin hormone. And then gonadotropin is responsible for follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These are the ones we're familiar with. I believe the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone to then stimulate that from the anterior pituitary. And then too much melatonin delays puberty. So if you get a question that asks about, like this kid's puberty is delayed, what might be the hormone that's playing a role in it? It's melatonin, things like that. And there'll be other things that we talk about when it comes to development. So the reason it affects puberty is because of the follicle and luteinizing hormone, right? These are the hormones that play a role in puberty, or otherwise, like, I believe they play a role in, like, the egg cycle and sperm synthesis in males, and then eggs for females. The parathyroid gland, it has two types of cells. That's the main thing I would focus on, and just understand that chief cells are helping blood calcium return to normal levels, and then oxalate cells, unknown function, right? So right here, main thing to know about parathyroid hormone is chief cells. So we'll just move on. Let's not get too in depth there. Again, here, it's like the pituitary gland. Remember some of these hormones. Here, I'll tell you their general functions. If you familiarize yourself with this, it'll be really helpful, because if I'm talking about ADH, it literally pertains to fluid balance, right? So antidiuretics, like coffee is sometimes considered like a ADH producing liquid, because sometimes you can get dehydrated from it, right? What else? ACTH and growth hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Here to say development of gametes, follicle in female, and the ovulation in females. And then you'll see like some like sperm thing as well in one of these. Forgot exactly which one, but this will kind of help you see what hormones are produced by other things: adrenal glands, adrenal medulla, mostly corticoids, so cortisol, androgens, things like that. We continue. These are the endocrine's cells. So these are organs whose main function is not endocrine function. Glands, they have a main endocrine function. So 3 types of stimulation. Hormonal, meaning there needs to be a hormone to release another hormone, right? So here we have the anterior pituitary releases THS. THS is thyroid stimulating hormone. So what this says is thyroid makes some hormone, right? So this is asking the thyroid to make thyroid hormone. So this is hormone to hormone. Humoral stimulation is based on the concentration of either hormones or nutrients in the blood. So your pancreas notices that glucose levels are increasing, therefore it will release insulin, right? So insulin is going to help capture some of this glucose, turn it into glycogen or glucagon stores. No, glycogen, and the glucagon releases glycogen to have glucose in the body. And this will help store glucose. So this has like a chemoreceptor that is going to be testing the blood, and it's going to send a signal to the pancreas, and then the pancreas will be like, okay, we need insulin, and then this insulin will go into the blood, and it will capture this glucose and store it. And then we have nervous system stimulation. So some endocrine glands are innervated, so there will be stimulated by nerve cells, right? So here we have the adrenal gland, and I believe the adrenal medulla then releases epinephrine and norepinephrine. And as we know, epinephrine is fight or flight, and norepinephrine is rest and digest. So in the way the body system would work, would you recognize a danger, you get a sympathetic nervous system is activated. They stimulate the adrenal medulla, and the adrenal medulla will then release epinephrine and norepinephrine. We have 3 types of hormones in the blood. So 2 of them are water soluble, 1 is lipid soluble. I believe most are protein hormones. So they work in different ways. Steroids include steroids producing gonads, which I believe we'll get into a little further on. So just review this as well. I don't want to get too much into it because literally the information you will need is on here. I will get into something about the lipid soluble. There's actually like a benefit for it being lipid soluble, but it does need to be carried in the blood because it is lipid soluble, right? So lipid soluble means it is hydrophobic, so it does not really want to be in spaces that contain a lot of water, and blood contains water. 55% of plasma is water, or 92% of plasma is water, and 55% of blood is plasma. Then we have protein hormones. Most hormones are in this category, right? So we have insulin. I forgot what G was. Parathyroid hormone. I believe that's oxytocin, ADH, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and then thyroid stimulating hormone. So G is glucagon. So glucagon is a hormone that will signal to I believe the liver, which is where glycogen is stored, to go through glycolysis and release glucose in the blood for the body to use. And I just wanted to go over this one because it is kind of important. It's the way your body stores and uses nutrients, and it gives you like a little bit of an insight as to like what these hormones are really doing on our day-to-day. Again, this would be humoral stimulation because we're testing that in the blood. It's the receptors are seeing, okay, there's low glucose levels. Let's increase that by releasing glucagon to break down glycogen into glucose. And then it would be the opposite for insulin, right? So insulin, the pancreas will test the blood. It will see, okay, glucose levels are too high. We need to store them away as glycogen. So we release insulin, and then they get stored as glycogen mainly in the liver, muscle tissues as well. So that just kind of listen back to it, review this a bit because this might be a question on your exam. And then biogenic amines, again, just water soluble. They're modified amino acids. Again, just go over this, get whatever knowledge you think you can gain from it. I just want to get into some of like the more nitty-gritty stuff. These are eicosanoids. The main thing of these local hormones would be to know that they can be paracrine and autocrine. So just kind of review this briefly, and then we get here. So autocrine stimulation, paracrine stimulation. It would be considered autocrine if it affects the cell in which it was formed, right? So eicosanoids, I believe, are proteins taken from phospholipids taken from the phospholipid bilayer of the cell, and using arachidonic acid and different enzymes, it creates eicosanoids, right? These eicosanoids will either help the cell itself strengthen or do the things it needs to do, initiate certain processes in the cell on its own. So yeah, just get familiar with this, get to know both of these terms, and then we'll move on. So I'll get to the lipid soluble hormones, but let's just review the water soluble hormones. They dissolve, or they are easily carried throughout in the blood. Some water soluble hormones will still need a carrier protein or a carrier molecule, just in order to protect them, right? So the blood, as great as it is, and we try and keep it in homeostasis, sometimes it will be too acidic, causing damage to certain hormones and certain things we want to get to certain target cells. So sometimes they will be carried in these carrier proteins. So easily transported in aqueous environment. So it is beneficial in that sense. Where they become, where a con of water-soluble hormones is that they cannot readily enter the cell, right? So what that means is we know that the phospholipid bilayer, right? Make two circles so that we know it is phospholipid bilayer. Cool. All right, cool. We know that it is tails inside, right? So meaning no water can really get through unless it goes through a channel protein, right? Unless we go through one of these proteins. Cool. So most of the time, our water-soluble hormone, that is by this, can't really get through the cell. So what they do is they embed themselves in the cell, and then, and we'll get into this a bit later, there are G proteins on the inside that will follow a chain of reactions which will ultimately affect the nucleus, right? So you'll typically go from a G protein to a kinase to then affecting this. Cyclic AMP is typically the kinase you will initiate, but we'll get into that. I don't think you need to get to know that too well. So this is the downside, right? Your hormone is kind of attaching on the outside. You're not really getting into it. Whereas the transport of lipid-soluble hormones, right? So they do require a carrier molecule, right? But the thing with that is that they can bind and unbind whenever they would like. So here we can see that albumin is non-selective. That was one of the plasma proteins that we saw, and then this would be a molecule, right? So when the hormone is attached to the carrier, it is bound and it can be freed, right? So it can be unbind. And it can unbind when it is trying to get to the target organ, right? Target organ or cell. So the benefit of this, and I believe we go further along, is it can directly enter the cell here, right? So bound hormone on carrier protein, right? So this would be a lipid-soluble protein or lipid-soluble hormone. And because it can permeate the membrane, because it is lipid-soluble, and this is your phospholipid bilayer, it can enter the cell. And when it enters the cell, it can reach the receptor complex, and it can do all the processes it needs to do. Typically, it goes into the nucleus, creates an mRNA, and then it will synthesize protein that the cell needs, right? It is all to do it does all the bidding for the cell, right? So the body itself is producing like a receipt of what the cell needs for itself. The cell doesn't know what it needs, the body does. So the body is sending this long receipt of things that the cell itself needs to make for itself into the cell, and then it's doing this whole, you don't need to know this whole process, you just need to know possibly the receptor complex, and I think I'll scroll back up and we'll come back down to get to this. I just wanted to show you that this is one of the benefits of lipid hormones, right? So you can just permeate the cell membrane. Yeah, so over here, it protects and prevents destruction. Why some water-soluble hormones are transported by carrier proteins. You want to protect these hormones. They're valuable to cells and getting all the processes in the body done. Hormone synthesis leading to increased blood level. So just get familiar with this as well. So factors influencing hormone concentration. Why is there a certain amount of hormone in the blood, or like too much, too little, etc. How the hormones are eliminated. So increased elimination leading to decreased blood levels. So just get familiar with this. Get familiar with this term as well, half-life. It's the time necessary to reduce to half original level and or concentration, right? It's used in chemistry. Water-soluble hormones with relatively shorter half-life. Steroid hormones, longer half-life. All right, target cells, interaction with hormones. Sorry to go quiet. It's weird. Hormones generated with several types of receptor cells, interaction between hormones and receptors. Okay, so how they interact, right? So again, now we get here, lipid-soluble hormones interacting with target cells. So in this is a good description of it. I just wanted to bring it up earlier. But the unbound lipid-soluble hormone diffuses readily through the plasma membrane, right? And binds with an intracellular receptor. This is key. Have that in mind. I believe there's a specific name for one of them, which will be spoken about in a bit later. And then when the hormone binds to the receptor complex or the intracellular receptor, you form the hormone receptor complex, right? Okay, that was whack. You form this hormone receptor complex. The hormone receptor complex then binds with a specific DNA sequence called the hormone response element. And then this will stimulate mRNA synthesis. mRNA, really what it's doing is it's providing a list of amino acids that the body needs to make to create the protein that it needs. So proteins are really the main things in our body that are like kind of dictating what is needed in the body and creating structures. Really, they really do everything, right? So protein is very it's extremely necessary in the body. You know, they make receptors, they make these carrier molecules as well. So, or maybe, I don't know about the molecules, but a lot of receptors, a lot of things that our body needs. And then, so water-soluble hormone interactions are a little different. Initiate a series of biochemical events, signal transduction pathways. You have a first messenger, so know that, and a second messenger, right? So that is what I was explaining a bit earlier, where they will bind to the outside of the cell, then there's a messenger, and then you go to a second messenger, and then you do the whole process, right? And then you finally get your protein. So that is how that interacts with it. So hormone binding and the activation of G proteins. Internal plasma membrane complex, their inactive state, GDP, active state, GTP, activated by binding of hormone, goes to activate two enzymatic cascade. What does this all mean? All right. I'm not the best with just words sometimes, so seeing it is extremely helpful, right? So here's your water-soluble hormone, right? So either it can embed itself in the membrane or it can typically go to a receptor protein, right? So this triangle fits there perfectly. And at that moment, when the hormone is not binded to the receptor, the G protein is inactive as well, right? So that's what it said here. So guanine diphosphate is inactive. But the second it binds to the receptor, it will phosphorylate. So the G protein binds to the activated receptor, right? So the hormone activates. So we activated our receptor. The G protein binds to the activated receptor. So this is our G protein. The purple is our G protein, and it contains a GDP. The GDP is bumped off, and GTP binds to the G protein. And then finally the G protein is activated, right? So GTP, guanine triphosphate, bumps off GDP. So now we're replacing, where this is going to be here, and this is bumped off. Now that the G protein is activated, it will go typically across the cell membrane on the inside of the cell, right? So this is the inside of the cell. So the hormone remains on the outside, and we are now working on the inside with the G protein. So activated G protein is released from the receptor, right, and moves along the inside of the plasma membrane, which results in formation or availability of second messenger. So adenylate cyclase activity, right? So this is your protein kinase activated by CAMP. So this is our second messenger, typically. Not always, but typically. And this overview, the best way to take it is that it is a brief overview, or like a look into what most water soluble hormones have to go through. Not each one uses the same kinase, but this is typically what would occur. So adenylate cyclase is a plasma membrane protein, and it's bound and activated by an activated G protein. So the hormone needed to bind to the receptor, then the G protein got activated because the hormone binded, and GDP is bumped off by GTP, which activates the G protein to propagate along the cell membrane to then get to the second messenger. So it increases the formation of second messenger, CAMP, from ATP. So AMP typically is where ATP is adenosine triphosphate. This is cyclic adenosine monophosphate, right? And protein kinases are activated by CAMP. So phosphorylate to other molecules results in activation or inhibition of molecules. So a lot of molecules need phosphorus to be activated, right? So it can phosphorylate other molecules, meaning that it can activate other molecules, other receptors. And so this is an example of glucagon, ADH, epinephrine, and in the example of glucagon, released from pancreatic cells in response to low blood glucose. So again, doing some little recall, this is humoral, right? It combines with receptors and plasma membranes of liver cells, causes increase in CAMP synthesis, causes activation of kinase A enzymes, leads to phosphorylation of specific enzymes, glucose released from liver cells, right? So it needed the hormone first to then get to the outside of the membrane to activate the G protein, to then activate the formation of CAMP, which is our second messenger, and the activation or formation of CAMP led to the activation of our kinase A enzyme, which leads to phosphorylation of specific enzymes, right? Which has in the final step, right? So this is what we wanted to do all along, was to release glucose from liver cells. So to get to here, we have to go all the way through this, right? So that is essentially the downside of these water-soluble proteins, right? Back to some more recall, going back to what the whole point was, is that these protein hormones have to go through all of these steps, whereas the lipid-soluble hormones, so protein hormones, biogenic amine hormones, they have to go through all these steps because they're water-soluble, whereas lipid hormones just permeate the cell membrane, go in, do the things they need to do inside, get the proteins they need right away to then activate the target cell. So again, this is typically what happens with glucagon, ADH, epinephrine. So then the GTP activated G protein goes to adenylate cyclase, right? Then this activation activates the synthesis of CAMP, right? We call it CAMP, CAMP, cyclic adenosine monophosphate, and this will activate protein kinase A enzymes. And in the glucagon example, it leads to phosphorylation of specific enzymes, right? And we will then have the glucose released from the liver cells. So that was all that we needed to do to get to that. And then further along, phospholipase C activity. All right, let's see. Initiate second type of enzymatic cascade when bound to G protein, splits PI. A phospholipid molecule within plasma membrane results in the formation of two secondary messenger molecules. I wouldn't say focus too much on this. Let me just keep action of DG. second measure using membrane. It's a third messenger. So I would say that this might not be very much in your exam. So essentially what's happening here is the same G protein that we've activated before will bind to this phospholipase C. It will release, I believe, these enzymes. So DAG being the second messenger that is inside the plasma membrane will activate protein kinase C, and then it will phosphorylate. So DAG, we're moving this way right now, will activate protein kinase enzyme, and then it furthers along by saying action of IP3 at the same time, which is the second messenger diffusing from plasma membrane to the cytosol, will increase intracellular calcium concentration, calcium ion concentration, so intracellular being inside the cell. And then it releases calcium ion in endoplasmic reticulum or calcium channels in membrane. So it acts as a third messenger by activating protein kinase directly or by binding calmodulin, altering the flow of ions through ion channels. So these are the three hormones that function through this phospholipase activity, right? So we're glucagon, ADH, and epinephrine use the adenylyl cyclase activity. This uses phospholipase C. So you're increasing the calcium levels here, right? So you activated this protein, and calmodulin is something that will regulate calcium, capture it, make sure that it's not just floating around in the cell, and then these ion channels will open, causing, like here we are, in oxytocin, it will cause uterine muscle contractions, right? So I believe antidiuretic hormone is a dehydrator. I think it makes you pee, I believe. I'm not too sure, but again, we'll figure out everything it does later on, or if not, feel free to Google it, look it up. How far along are we? Is this like halfway? Not even. Jeez. Okay. Action of water-soluble hormones. Multiple results possible from hormone activation, right? Activation or inhibition of enzymatic pathways, stimulation of growth or cellular reproduction, stimulation. So yeah, just get familiar with this on your own as well. And target cells' degree of cellular response. So I guess this is where we'll go into diabetes at some point, because it has to do with upregulation and downregulation. I believe one of the types of diabetes has to do, so like downregulation reduces the cell's sensitivity to hormone. I believe diabetes type 2 decreases the sensitivity to insulin, right? So it's not that the body doesn't produce any insulin like type 1. In type 2, the sensitivity of the body is just decreased to insulin, right? So like it's just not as reactive to insulin. So receptor fluctuations alter in response to changes in hormone concentration. Cells decreasing receptor numbers in response to elevated levels, right? So if you have too much of something, your body's going to see that, hey, like there's too much hormones going around. We don't want to overregulate or over activate or be super sensitive to it because there's just so much available, right? But when there's too little, it will use upregulation, right? So if there's too little, you're going to do upregulation where you'll put out more receptors to bind to your hormone. Whereas if there's just too much hormone lying around, you'll take away some of these receptors. And here you can see that there's some spaces missing because you don't want to be oversensitive to it, right? There's just way too much out there. Again, humoral, right? You're testing to see what the level of blood is, the concentration of blood. Becomes less responsive to growth hormone, right? So that's in mature secretory cells. No longer needs to continue growing at a accelerated rate. So, that'd be like if we were kept responding to growth hormone, we'd grow forever. And let's see, cellular response, receptor interactions. So these interactions are important. Again, I'm not going to get too much into it. It's if you want to spend some time on it. If in lecture they told you, hey, pay attention to this, take your time, get to know it. It's really a quick concept. But if you're going to look at it, which I recommend you do, you look at the examples that they provide here. So through that, target cells, degree of cellular response, receptor interactions, adipose cells. So here we are. Different target cells can house various types of receptors, allowing them to bind multiple hormones simultaneously. So every cell won't just bind to one hormone, while some can. So these hormones work together, right? Some are permissive. So first hormones allow the action of the second hormone. This is kind of reminds me of the hormonal stimulation where you need one hormone to then do the other hormone. Not the same, but it might help you remember permissive in a way. And then antagonistic is which they cause opposite effects, right? So like insulin and glucagon, they will cause opposite effects. One wants to release glucose, the other one wants to inhibit glucose and store it. So that would be an antagonistic effect. Nutrient metabolism, steps of nutrient metabolism, glucose, fatty acids, and some amino acids are nutrients. They are oxidized by cells to provide ATP, right? So energy. They circulate the blood. Glucose stored within glycogen, right? Glycogen stores in the livers, muscle cells, etc. Fatty acids stored within triglycerides, and liver, adipose tissue, and skeletal muscle. Nutrients deposited and withdrawn here, right? So your body can leave them there, and then it can take it away from there. Again, I'm not going to get too into it, but I guess I'll explain a little bit of gluconeogenesis. When there is too little glucose, your body will create glucose from things such as amino acids. And to break down the word, glucose, right? Neo being new, and then genesis is like the creation, right? So just in breaking down the word, you can see that creating new glucose, right, from non-glucose things. And then you will read the other two. Again, same for here. Lipogenesis is actually from triglycerides. There's no like liponeogenesis. And then protein anabolism and catabolism. Anabolism is I always say A for adding up of, so you're creating a larger molecule, and catabolism for cutting down, so you're making smaller. Let's see, nutrient metabolism. Again, here, just another overview, and then we get into the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So this is kind of where we get into the nitty-gritty of hormones, releasing hormones, like doing things in the body. I would say get familiar with bolded words. So whenever you're reading any slides, just go over bolded words. Don't really need to know the hypophysectomy, but it might help in a way, but I'll get into that. I guess, again, bolded words. And hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Also know that. Here, so main takeaway I would say here is that the posterior pituitary is the neural part of the pituitary gland. So neural being nervous system. So this part of the nervous system develops beginning the third week of development. Same for the anterior pituitary. And it grows from the developing hypothalamus, right? Composed of these two parts that they're labeled or called together the pars nervosa, pair nervosa, pair of the nervous system. Another way to remember that name, because we know that it's the neural part of the pituitary gland. Cell bodies and dendrites within the hypothalamus. The axons extend through the infundibulum to attach to the pars nervosa. They have 2 nuclei. You don't have to get too specific, but if you'd like to be the most prepared person on that test, get to know it. Anterior pituitary, not nervous tissue, not nervous system, nothing to do with that. And it develops as an invagination of the ectoderm, right? So part of the ectoderm started to fold, and it just kept folding inwards, and then it created this sac, which was the anterior pituitary. And just to have an image of what the anterior pituitary looks like, it looks like 2 little bulbs at the bottom. And I guess best thing to know is that where one is neural, let's look at this picture. Where one is neural, over here we're looking at the axons that stem through the infundibulum, right, of this posterior pituitary, from the nuclei we have, right? So the paraventricular and the supraoptic, and they each produce these 2 hormones, which will be stored here in the posterior pituitary, right? So this has oxytocin, and I believe what it's ADH. Cool. Whereas the anterior pituitary, where not neural, has systems of not neural networks, capillary networks, and it has primary and secondary plexi, or plexuses, where your primary plexus is on the infundibulum, and your secondary plexus is on the anterior pituitary. So just be familiar with those. Well, I said you might want to be familiar with the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, or the hypophyseal tract as well, is because it'll help you understand where they're coming from, right? So the name, it might be hard to remember. I don't think you'll need to really remember it. Again, use what your lecture professor has told you that you need to study and what you don't. But here is where that name comes from, right? So hypophyseal bud, and then the hypophyseal pouch. That's where they're both the hypothalamo-hypophyseal. One being the tract and the other one being the portal system, right? Because one is a capillary blood network, and the other one is a neural network. All right, so tract is the neural, where I can't remember anything from the life of me. Portal system, where portal system is just blood, right? So it's the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary, I think, holds like something like 7 hormones, right? Yeah. So hormones synthesized by the hypothalamus, you have your oxytocin and antidiuretic, and that is for the pituitary gland. Whereas your anterior pituitary mechanism of control is hormonal. So you need hypothalamus to release a releasing hormone. So these are releasing hormones, except for the prolactin inhibiting and growth inhibiting hormone, where then they will be released by the anterior pituitary. Right, so then these will stimulate anterior pituitary. Again, hormones stored in posterior pituitary, synthesized by hypothalamus and neurosecretory cells. Review this on your own. Just this as well. It's a little easier to remember. I kind of wanted to go over this a bit, actually. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, right? So this is going to then also go to the thyroid, and the thyroid will then synthesize and release TH, which is thyroid hormone, right? So one hormone for another hormone for the hormone that we need. Prolactin releasing hormone releases prolactin from the anterior pituitary. Gonadotropin releasing hormone. Gonads is a good word to know. Typically means like sex organs or sex cells. And what that does is it releases follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, right, which has everything to do with female reproduction or female development. And then corticotropin releasing hormone. Cortical is good to know because it's just like cortisol, and that is essentially what will be released from the adrenocorticotropic hormone. So corticotropin, adrenocorticotropic, right? And then growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone. So they just try and remember them like that. They can ask you questions like stimulating the anterior pituitary for adrenocorticotropic hormone, what needs to be released first? It's now corticotropin releasing hormone, right? So it's a lot of memorizing as well as like how lab is. I'm sorry you guys have been beat up by lab recently, but you need to remember more. So forget everything you have learned prior to this. So yeah, again, review this on your own. Again, it's up to you. It's up to what you want to get from studying and get on your exams. Hormone release from anterior pituitary, specific hormones within hypothalamus release. So yeah, releasing hormones, inhibiting hormones. And here, again, is just a larger overview, essentially saying what it secretes or what it increases secretion of, right? So again, review this, try and memorize as much as you can, try and make things make sense for yourself. And then these are the 6 major hormones of the anterior pituitary. Growth hormone, very important. And then this will also be important, I believe. We get into it further along. I guess also know the melanocyte stimulating hormone that produces melanin, so pigmentation, things like that. This is a great diagram to look at. And what I would also like for you guys to do in this diagram is name these, right? So be able to name these: thyroid releasing hormone, or thyrotropin releasing hormone, I think. Prolactin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, right? So be able to name these, so go write them out, go write whatever it is, and then pair it to whichever one it will be. And then here at the thyroid, we're not done, because then the thyroid is stimulated to produce thyroid hormone. Prolactin, so one-shot thing. Follicle and luteinizing hormone. And then here, release of corticosteroids like cortisol. We mostly associate it to stress. Growth hormone acts on body tissues. So these little diagrams, these little things, if you study them, they will help you in the long run. Again, just a different table. I will start because you guys will need to go through that. Yeah, okay, so we do go through IGF in a bit. So release controlled by growth hormone releasing hormone. Okay, so we're talking about growth hormone now. I'm about to sneeze. Okay, I don't need to sneeze. So growth hormone the release of growth hormone is controlled by growth hormone releasing hormone. And the release is influenced by the age, time of day, nutrient level, stress, and exercise. So the more exercise you get as a young kid, actually it's better for you. More sleep you get as well. So growth hormone, what is the target? Hepatocytes. Where do we find hepatocytes? I believe the liver, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Yeah, I know my stuff. Okay, so it's the liver. And the hepatocytes release insulin-like growth factor, and they're bound to carrier proteins. So these would be a steroid hormone or a lipid soluble hormone, or they could also be a water hormone, depending. So it's a 20-hour half-life compared to 20 minutes for regular growth hormone. It is overlapping function with GH and responsible for greater response, right? So because it lasts longer, it can make longer changes or change the body in the direction it needs it to be for a longer period of time. Stimulated to increase glycogenolysis and glyconeogenesis, increases blood glucose levels. Rise refers to as diabetogenic. So it will affect, so its target cells will be all cells with receptors for growth hormone or insulin-like growth factor. The bone and muscle are particularly affected. Adipose tissue, I guess, will also be affected. Again, this is up for you to review. And then I guess we would go here, where, we know that the hypothalamus releases GHRH, right? So growth hormone releasing hormone. The growth hormone releasing hormone, the hypothalamus responds to various stimuli, right? And it releases that into the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. So if we're affecting the portal system, we're not affecting the posterior, but we're affecting the anterior pituitary, right? As mentioned earlier. So you can go back and review that. So in response to the growth hormone releasing hormone, the anterior pituitary will then release its growth hormone. The growth hormone stimulates hepatocytes. So the growth hormone will affect hepatocytes. So growth hormone, as we mentioned before, has a half-life of 20 minutes, right? So what are you going to do in 20 minutes? You're not going to make anything grow in 20 minutes. So it targets the liver. So it targets our hepatocytes. So then the hepatocytes will then release IGF, insulin-like growth factor. The insulin-like growth factor is released out into the blood. And both GH, which lasts 20 minutes, and IGF, which lasts 20 hours, will stimulate target cells, right? So any cell that will bind to either IGF or growth hormone, it will bind to, and then it will increase growth in bone and muscle and all the cells. It will, again, increase glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, and it will decrease glycogenesis. So you're using up all your glucose stores and all that stuff. Representative hormones regulated by hypothalamus. Growth hormones. So again, just review. Disorders are like pituitary dwarfism, gigantism, things like that. Anatomy of the thyroid. Okay, let's see. The main thing I would say here is the follicular cells, I believe, which I would pay some extra attention to. I believe we'll get into the mechanisms for thyroid hormone synthesis and release. Oh, God. All right. Let's see. I'll be right back. All right, so into the thyroid hormone. I don't remember being asked too much about thyroid hormones. I feel like it's overcomplicated for no reason. So for now, I will skip over it. Send me an email if you really want me to go over it. I don't really want to, but okay. But the main thing we know is thyrotropin releasing hormone, right? We know, okay, my Apple Pencil died. See, that's a sign. All right, so thyrotropin releasing hormone is released by the hypothalamus. This we know, and it enters to decrease in blood levels of the thyroid hormone, and then it will go to the so it's released by, so thyrotropin releasing hormone is released by hypothalamus, which will then go to the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which will then bind to the receptors of the follicular cells of the thyroid to stimulate release of thyroid hormone. And there's two forms in which it can be released into circulation. That was what I was trying to get out. Okay, it took me a second. But yeah, essentially that is what it's saying. Just this is the main takeaway, I would say, is just knowing the whole route in which it needs to take to be released into circulation. Hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis, lipid-soluble hormone increases protein synthesis. So also know, I guess, that it's lipid-soluble, so I'll need that carrier. The increase in thyroid hormone is increased metabolic rate, increased body temperature. So increased lipolysis, so you'll break down, and this is working synergistically, so it is not opposing it, right? So if you were increasing lipolysis and increasing lipogenesis, going back to do some recall, you would be doing antagonistic work, right, where you're working against yourself. But this is working synergistically, where you're increasing lipolysis and you are decreasing lipogenesis. Increased breathing rate, it increases heat, right, and increases O2 for demand for cellular respiration. It also adjusts basal metabolic rate of many cells. Also, I guess, know the calorogenic effect. Is my Apple Pencil better? No. Okay, cool. We're back in business. Right, so no calorogenic effect. I don't think you need to know that. Not much on the disorders. The adrenal glands, paired, pyramid shaped. Just know it has two regions: adrenal medulla, adrenal cortex. Medulla is typically the inside, and cortex the outside. You'll meet that a lot when it comes to a lot of items, like a lot of things. So in immune system, you'll find that in lymphatic nodes and things like that. Also the brain, if you think about it, the cortex is the outside of the brain. The medulla oblongata is the center, more crucial part of the brain. Let's see, what do we need to know here? Hormones of the adrenal cortex. I would say know the zones, so zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis, and know what it is that's synthesized there, right? So it's in bold. Anything in bold, pay attention, always. Again, this is just a brief overview of what you should focus on and what you need to study. Representative hormones regulated by the hypothalamus. So again, this is also important. Know what each one of these does and colors. I don't think you'll need to know the cells. So adrenal cortex, responsible for 25 hormones. Adrenal medulla, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Right. And action of cortisol, most common. So what does cortisol do? It increases nutrient levels in blood. That would be a main takeaway. So cortisol and corticosterone, which would be the most common action of glucocorticoids. Again, the umbrella term, and then the more specific under that umbrella term, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, corticotropin releasing hormone. Right. So corticotropin releasing hormone released from the hypothalamus will affect the adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? So ACTH released from the anterior pituitary again, right? I'm just going to put these in brackets so that you can associate them. And then ACTH will bind to adrenal cortex, and again, adrenal cortex has with over 25 hormones associated to it, and then those are all glucocorticoids, so it will release cortisol and corticosterone as the most common, and then that will lead to the increased nutrient levels in blood. The action of cortisol, again, review this if you'd like. You don't have to get too in depth. Again, this is what I was saying. Hypothalamus, negative feedback by cortisol, time of day, or the stress, as what we mainly know it as. Hypothalamus responds to these stimuli, and the hypothalamus will release corticotropin releasing hormone into the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system, right? Because we're going anterior. Posterior, again, try and remember what posterior hormones are held in the posterior pituitary gland, which would be oxytocin and ADH, antidiuretic hormone. And then in response to the corticotropic releasing hormone, the anterior pituitary releases adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone. Adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone stimulates the adrenal cortex to release the glucocorticoids, right? So the cortisol and the corticosterone. Cortisol stimulates the target cells, increasing nutrients in the blood. So stimulation of lipolysis, inhibition of lipogenesis. So we're just trying to get all that stuff out there into the blood. Stimulation of protein catabolism occurs in all cells except hepatocytes. Again, more disorder stuff. For some reason, I want to say if you're going to remember any disorder, memorize the Cushing syndrome. Pancreatic hormones, enemy of the pancreas. Alright, so pancreas, okay, this is on your exam 100%. Know your alpha and beta cells and which one they secrete. One secretes glucagon. So I'll literally ask you where alpha cells secrete blank, beta cells secrete blank, right? Or they'll ask you what is the function of beta cells, what is the function of alpha cells. You just know this, if nothing else from this video, please. Pancreatic hormones affect the pancreatic hormones, blood glucose concentration, right? So they both affect glucose concentration. You can try and memorize this normal range, lowering high blood glucose levels, right? So we know insulin lowers glucose levels. Detected by chemoreceptors, right? So we're testing the blood. Target cells bound by insulin. Glycogenesis is stimulated, so we're trying to create glycogen. Glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis are inhibited, and then glucose molecules removed from blood and stored as glycogen. In adipose tissues, it's the same, but with lipids. The release of insulin result in decrease in all the nutrients in the blood. We mainly associate it to glucose because glucose is sugar and diabetics. That's how we mainly associate it with. But it actually affects all the nutrients in the blood. So lipids, I believe even some proteins for muscles, increase uptake of amino acids, right? And again, glucose, how we know. So raising low blood glucose levels with glucagon. So glucagon is the other hormone to insulin, less known because it's not commonly known as medicine. We know insulin as medicine for diabetes. Glucagon will increase the levels of glucose. Not only glucose, but the same as insulin, other nutrients. This one, not so much like proteins, how it would in insulin, but it increases glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis while stopping glycogenesis. So then these are the abnormal levels of glucose are associated with these types of diabetes. Again, know these, please. So here, type 1 diabetes absent, meaning you were born without the release of insulin. Tends to occur in children or younger individuals, have autoimmune component, and they require daily injections of insulin. So these are decreased insulin release or insulin effectiveness, right? So this was that sensitivity. I believe it was downregulation. Obesity, major cause in development, tends to occur in older individuals but can occur in young adults. Treatment with diet, exercise, medications, right? So this needs insulin, type 1 needs insulin, type 2 does not. So I may have said the opposite earlier, but just to correct that. Gestational diabetes, seen in pregnant women. You could know this. I guess this might be a disorder that can be asked. And it has a chance to develop to type 2. Hypoglycemia is blood glucose levels can affect anyone. You will pass out. You will, get dizzy, altered mental status, things like that. And then as we age, there are changes in the endocrine system. So yes, that was a quick overview, trying to break down a lot of it. A lot of it was just me reading through things, but hopefully it explained and, you got to see a lot of the things you might need to go through. But yeah, that was pretty much it. Good luck to everyone.